So, welcome to our book series, um, sponsored by HFC and Al's Authors. My name's Christy Yates, and I'm just going to be moderating a conversation with our author of the day, Renée Harmon, MD, and I want to give her a little chance to tell us a little bit about herself. But her book is called Surfing the Waves of Alzheimer's, and I don't have this tagline on it. It's the practicing the principles. Um,
Principles of caregiving that kept
Boom.
me upright.
Oh, that's right. That kept me upright. I can't tell you how much that rings true for so many of us and I love the metaphor of surfing the waves. So anyway, welcome, Dr. Renee. I'm so glad you're here with us. And I know you're now a retired family practitioner, and I think you're still living in Alabama, correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
Birmingham, Alabama.
that's right. So, I want to introduce you to the group. We are just going to spend a little time talking about your book, but I do want to share that this is just a heart-wrenching story, but you tell it with such beauty and wisdom. Really, that's the word that comes to me. There's just a lot of wisdom, and I appreciated that you shared so many principles at the end of each chapter, things that really helped you and that could really help others. And this is a unique piece of it, right? Early onset Alzheimer's. It's a smaller portion of people that are afflicted with this, and it can be really difficult, and you share a lot of that. It was very eye-opening to me, so I appreciated so much that you shared with us. So I just want to say welcome and let you say a few words about yourself, and then we'll kind of jump into some
Sure.
questions.
All right, well, sure. So I'm Dr. Renee Harmon. I'm a family practitioner that just recently retired. Actually, I retired just before COVID hit.
Oh,
Who knew?
yeah,
But that was fortuitous. I don't think I could have retired in the midst of COVID. That I
right.
would have felt too guilty about that. But I was in private practice with my husband. We shared a practice, Harvey, for since 1992. I can't do the math right that quickly, but we shared a practice until he was forced to retire when he
Yeah.
had the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. We have two daughters. We have Elena, the oldest, and Christina, and they were 14 and 17 years old when their dad was diagnosed. So Harvey was 50 when he
Wow.
was diagnosed. So we had
Yeah.
this shared practice, family practice, that just became my solo practice.
Yeah.
As the same time, I became the primary parent to the two daughters and
Right.
caregiver, care partner to Harvey. And he lived with Alzheimer's disease for 8 years. He
Mm-hmm.
was home alone for 4. And then I had in-home care for 2 years. And when that became too difficult, he was placed in memory care units. He was actually in 3 different memory care facilities
Right.
and had 5 different geriatric psych admissions. So,
Got
and
it.
he
Yeah.
passed away 2018. So it's been 2.5 years.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And you, as I said, your story, you tell your story so well, and it's full of such wisdom. So I want to ask also then, kind of jumping into it, share with us a little bit about why you decided to write your book and maybe your process there.
Yeah. So I actually started writing the book soon after Harvey passed away. And I don't know what I was telling myself, but now looking back, it was obviously a big project, something to fill that void that
Sure.
had been left after all the caregiving. But I had journaled the entire 8 years that Harvey was ill. So I had 6 full notebooks and all these stories and a wealth of information that I felt I could share. And I've always thought that I wanted to write a book, but I never had a story, but I had a story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you did. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about journaling, and that was definitely something that comes through in the book about how important it was for you. It helped you maybe, I'm guessing, process a little bit along the way, but then certainly afterwards able to put some of the pieces together. But can you tell us a little bit about how you approach journaling and your journaling, and I mean, did you have a structure? Was it just sort of diary entries? How did it help you, and how did it serve to support you along the way?
Well, I started journaling probably about 2 or 3 months after I first thought something was going on. And
Hmm.
it was a place for me just to really write down what I was observing. Just, I was in that phase kind of denial. Is this real? Is this
Right.
not? Okay, no, this happened, this happened. So it started off that way. And as we got closer to the diagnosis, I knew this was happening. It was a mainly it was a place for me to vent and
Okay.
to pour out everything I was feeling in
Got
a
it.
safe way. I couldn't do that with Harvey. He was already
Right. Right.
going through so much on his own. I didn't need to tell him what I was
Right.
experiencing. So it was a place for me just to get angry and to get
Right.
sad and to say everything I needed to say and get out of my body.
Sure. Sure.
So yeah,
And,
so I used that and I
yeah.
used and it was very helpful seeing physicians to have like a chronology of what had happened too. So
Right.
that was helpful. But this
Y-
then yes.
Yeah. I was thinking, gosh, it's almost like case notes, right? Like you were writing some case notes. But I also imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you said, you couldn't really share this with your partner because he was the person who you were working for with or
Mhm.
supporting. And then your daughters are teenagers, and it would be a little hard to, as a parent, put that much on them. And even though they did a lot to support their dad, that certainly wasn't the place. So I can see how journaling could be really supportive. So that's great.
And I did have close family and friends that
Yeah,
I could share with. Eventually, took
right.
me a while to
Yeah,
share, but yeah.
sure.
And then I had these 6 journals that were the backbone for the book. All the stories are in that journal, in those.
Wow. Wow. That's priceless, really. That's priceless. Um, and, as a physician, you had a particular level of knowledge already about dementia, certainly as a physician. But can you talk to us a little bit about other sources or resources that helped you to understand more about the diagnosis and the disease? And you kind of touched on, there's a part of you at one point that was a little maybe in denial about it, but then maybe what sort of things helped you get past that and support you in your growing knowledge about it to be able to help Harvey?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
absolutely part of it as I was trying to decide, is this real or not? Looking up I on the internet, anything I could find and just would look at just your usual sources. But I really found it helpful to look at videos of real people in various stages and see their interactions with their caregivers, with their loved ones. And I'll never forget one particular interview of a couple. I think they were younger, and the man had Alzheimer's, and the woman was answering all the interview questions, and he was just kind of silently nodding. And so the interviewer asked him, "So what does your wife do to help you?" And he just kind of said, "Everything." And I thought, this is it. This is what
Wow.
it's gonna be like. So
Sure.
that was really helpful. And then I found a couple of memoirs, and that was another reason I wanted to write a book, because I couldn't find a memoir about younger onset.
Right.
But memoirs were also really helpful to put a real face, a real story rather than textbook things. I think
Sure.
the other thing that I would want to mention that was very helpful to me was a website, alzinfo.com. It's the Fisher Alzheimer's research.
Yeah.
It was very helpful to me because I had a detailed um, uh, staging system, the 7 stage, and very
Yes.
detailed information and substaging, and it was really helpful for me to see where Harvey was,
Right.
how long each of these stages and substages lasted. That was very, very helpful.
Yeah. Did you ever feel at times, I'm kind of taking off on this in another way. Did you ever feel, because you're a physician and you know a lot more maybe than the layperson about a lot of these things, was it ever I don't know, more challenge. Do you feel like it was more challenging for you at times to kind of see what was coming, like more fright? I don't know. I wonder if it would be more
Yeah.
frightening to know more about what's
Yeah,
coming.
no, I don't know. I don't think
Huh.
so. I
Okay.
think I was
It's
felt
probably hard
comfortable
to say.
kind of knowing what
Yeah.
to expect.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it was easier that way.
Yeah.
I kind of
Yeah. Um, Another thing I alluded to in the beginning is you integrated into each chapter some practices, which I thought were really wonderful. And you include them at the end of each chapter. And I wanted to ask, are these practices that you actually used yourself? And which ones did you use? And how did you determine to develop those?
yeah. So let me first off say that the book is organized with the chapters are titled caregiving principles, like it's better to be kind than
Right.
correct. And then each chapter illustrates those stories with story and then discusses the principle and then has the practices. So
Yes, yes.
it was just a good way to organize the book. And even though it's chronologic, but yeah, there were several of the practices that I did use. The most obvious is just reframing the situation from your loved one's point of view. So the story in the book is a long, complicated story about Harvey and his father who had dementia, going to spring his mother, who also had dementia, out of the nursing home.
You're right.
And it felt like he was making my life so miserable because he would understand what I was saying. She can't come home, Harvey. But then his father would say, we need to go get her. And she would beg. And he just kept saying yes to everybody. And when I just stepped back and looked at it from his point of view, he just wanted to please. He loved
Yes.
me. He loved his parents. He wanted to do
Right.
what they wanted him to do. And
Yeah.
so that's one of the practices I think is very helpful. And just actually rewriting the story, something that happened in present tense. Okay, this is happening right now. And then rewriting the story in third person, in the voice
Hmm.
of the person with
Right.
Alzheimer's, rewriting the story from their point of view.
Right. Right.
So powerful.
Very powerful. And I can even see how, in many ways, we could do that even without for someone who doesn't have dementia, maybe somebody who we're like, what
Absolutely.
are they thinking? And then we stop and think, well, let me
Oh,
think, what would they be thinking? Yeah, so helpful. But I
absolutely.
like that, the reframing of it. And I remember that story, and it was just, and yeah, it also even speaks to how vulnerable our family members with dementia, Alzheimer's are, because they can be sort of co-opted into
Oh,
so
yeah.
many different things and behaviors.
And his parents didn't know that's what they were
No,
doing,
no, of course not. They had dementia
They
as
had
well, and
this.
it was really hard. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very complicated. I could see how that would be very difficult for you on the other side, trying to unravel everything. Um, so, are there any of those practices that you continue to use for any other reason?
Well, I use them when I speak
Yeah.
sometimes, or when I present a workshop, I get the participants to do some of them. I still journal.
Yes.
And then when I wrote the book, I realized that most of the practices that I was coming up with were journal prompts because
Yeah.
I'm a journaler.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
realized not everybody journals, not everybody likes to write. And I elicited the help of a friend, my friend Hannah, who's a school psychologist, who knows that not all people are learners in one way. So she
Right.
helped me come up with some of the other practices that were maybe more tangible, like
Right.
write a note on a sticky note that says be kind and put it on your mirror just to see it every day and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, that was great. Um, You had some really tough times. What were some of the strategies or practices that kept you going and helped you to surf? Because you really, I'm even thinking about the story you just told, but also later on when Harvey was really having a challenging time in residence and had to, as you said, he had 3 different psychiatric placements, and you had a lot to contend with. So when things were really tough, what were some strategies or practices that really helped you to surf?
Well, when it was really tough like that in those last years, our daughters were older then, and we
Right.
really did lean on each other a lot, as well as my friends. And two close friends were always available for me to call and talk through a situation. But turn that off. Sorry. I think the more not interesting, what helped me afloat during those middle stages that I really want people to try to work on too is continuing to do the things that bring you joy.
Yeah. Yes.
And if you have to adapt them. And I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but I did it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You sure did.
Couldn't just stop reading books.
Right.
Started listening to audiobooks on the way
Right.
to and from work. And I started playing. I play the piano, so and Harvey didn't particularly care for classical music, but I bought a big book of 70s music, and we would play,
Oh,
sing Billy Joel and Elton John songs. So
yeah.
just adapted. I learned how to knit and
Uh-huh.
crochet by watching YouTube videos, and I could just sit and do that while we were together.
That
And
was
so
great. Yeah.
finding ways to keep doing what you.
Yeah. And it seemed to me like you really built a team around you too, because one story that speaks to that adaptation that you did was how at church you played, you were in
Right.
the choir, you played, and Harvey needed someone to sort of help him because he might not be able to be there the whole time during practice. And so you had different people that walked him around and sort of took care of him while you were doing what was feeding your soul at that time and giving you an outlet. So maybe you can speak to a little bit of how did you build your team up with friends and family and resources?
Well, I think that the key to that for me was being vulnerable and being willing to share
Yeah.
and not feel like you had to keep it a secret.
Yeah.
Um, it took about a year after Harvey's diagnosis before I really started telling people.
Mm-hmm.
And the more people knew, the better and easier it was just to share what was going on at home. And then they would be the ones, our friends would be the ones who would just offer. So
Yeah.
your example with the praise band, I just told my friend Bill, I think I'm going to have to stop playing because Harvey's wandering
Mm-hmm.
during rehearsal. And he said, no, I'll just be with Harvey during that time.
Yeah. Yeah. It was great. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't think of that. So I think
Right.
that was the key, is just being vulnerable and sharing what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and I want to say that was another thing that stood out for me in your story was the people who walked with him because he'd been a runner. Your Harvey was a marathoner and he couldn't do that anymore, but he liked to be active. So you were at the practice all day and you had people walking with him and the were dogs, and then you had people cooking with them. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you built that I'm totally going off the script that we had about
Oh,
different
that's
questions we
fine.
were going to ask, but you know what, Renee, it just sounds like it would fit in so well. I love what you're saying
Mhm.
about being able to share this because caregivers need a village, right, to support one another.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it sounded like it kind of came together very organically, but how did that impact you, your life, your daughters, and Harvey having so many people willing to come in and share in this?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, I
Yeah.
already had a community. I knew I had a community. I didn't realize that I could be as vulnerable as I was, but it was such a difficult time. I had
Yeah,
to
yeah,
share it,
yeah,
but they rallied. I mean, this
yeah,
community I had rallied. And I know
yeah.
not everybody has a community like that. And not everybody is comfortable asking for help from their community or
Right,
accepting help from their
right.
community. I was just blown away and
Yeah,
overwhelmed with it. And it made me feel supported. And
yeah,
even people who didn't offer physical help, even though they knew,
yeah,
I knew they knew,
yeah,
I could feel their support, that invisible
yeah,
support, like roots in a of a tree in a forest that just ground you and know that you're protected. It can't say I can't say more about that. That's just
Yeah. So true. And I totally get what you're saying. It is hard if you're, I mean, it's clear from your very introduction in your book what a high achiever you are as an individual. You even talk about this. You have so many varied interests, and so it's hard for high achievers and just people who've kind of been doing their own thing, right, to start asking for help. It's a real like, and it is that vulnerability. So
Mhm.
did it get easier reaching out?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So you mentioned the neighbors that walk dogs with Harvey. They actually offered, they noticed that Harvey wasn't walking. So these two neighbors offered to walk dogs. Well, one day Harvey wandered early in the morning and I called one of these walkers and said, "Hey, I need you to see if you can drive around the neighborhood and see if you can
Yeah.
find it."
Yeah. Be on the lookout.
We have to look at, yeah. The more
Oh
people
my.
know, the safer your loved one is too, I think.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so I alluded to this earlier also. You were a sandwich generation parent. You had someone you were taking care of, and you had two daughters you were raising. They were teenagers at the time. I think you said 14 and 17 when Harvey was diagnosed. How did this time period with Harvey impact their lives?
I can't overstate how much of an impact it had
Yeah.
on all three of us, right?
Yeah.
So the older one was 17. She was entering her senior year of college.
Yeah.
Senior year of high school,
High
sorry.
school. Yeah.
So it absolutely impacted her decision about college. She had always known she wanted to go out of state for college, but she really had to wrestle with that. Is that the right thing to do?
Right.
It was his first year. He wasn't that bad off.
Yeah.
And I encouraged her to do what she really wanted to do. And she eventually gave herself permission to go out of state for college. And
Yeah.
she had the complete college experience.
Yeah.
While she was away, she did decide to seek counseling on her own by the school counselor there. And
Excellent.
and I know because of all of that, she chose to go into social work. She's a
Wow.
social worker.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know that played a role, but it truly impacted our younger daughter
Yeah.
very greatly. So she was 14. She was entering
Yeah.
her freshman year. She didn't know what Alzheimer's disease was. She had
Right.
never heard of it, never heard of it.
Yeah.
But in that freshman year, she had to take a health class and they were doing like a disease of the week kind of thing. And somebody was presenting about Alzheimer's disease one day. And think the teacher asked, raise your hand if you know somebody with Alzheimer's, and all
Uh,
the kids were sharing silly stories about silly grandma and the funny
yeah.
things she did. And she just had to sit and listen to that.
Yeah.
Ah, But she was very helpful to me and her father during the
Yeah.
3 years that she was home. She was his right hand gal for anything technological. And she helped cook dinner some. She would guide him. She was late to school one day when he asked her to, um, if he could follow her to the gym. And it was very close by both the high school and our gym and the house. And she was late to school because she said yes.
Yeah.
And then she also had to struggle with where does she go to college, and she
Yeah.
chose to stay in town.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay. Yeah.
in town, and oh my goodness, this just breaks my heart when I really, not breaks my heart, but brings tears to my eyes to
Yeah.
think about. When she was 16, she was invited to be a counselor at a camp for special needs adults.
Yeah.
Because she had been working with her dad for 2 years, she thought, yeah, okay, I can do that. And it was with friends who had told her that it was a good experience. So she went and loved it. And she has
Yeah.
been a counselor at that camp for 10 years.
Oh my.
And she is now a special ed teacher,
Oh.
all because of this.
Yeah.
And on top of that, she met her now husband at that first camp. He was also a counselor at that
Yeah.
camp.
Yeah.
I mean, her whole life trajectory
Sure.
was impacted by this. And she
Yeah.
also sought counseling on her own while she
Right.
was in college.
Yeah. Yeah. And I so appreciate you sharing this with us because I think sometimes there's a tendency to want to protect our kids and keep them far away from anything that might feel painful. And yet you're speaking to the level of compassion and life purpose that can come from this too. Not that, I mean, by no means would I ever suggest that, hey, if you've lived through this, then this is your career path.
Yeah.
But just the level of compassion. I always say empathy in action is compassion,
Yeah.
right? So when
Perfect.
we all have the capacity for some empathy, but when we put it in practice in small ways, big ways, that's really what compassion is. And that's a skill set and a practice that feeds us too. So what a beautiful way to talk about that. And before we get off your daughters, can you tell me or tell us a little bit about how you shared the book with your daughters and how they feel about the book that you wrote? Have they read it? Are they
Yeah.
big fans?
No, I didn't. They knew I was writing the book.
Yeah,
They didn't express any trepidation about that.
yeah,
And I had them read the final copy. Well, yeah, the near final copy.
yeah.
And they both made some changes. And one in particular went through with a fine-tooth comb and was offering her proofreading skills. And another thing that they taught me, because they are both in the fields that they're in, and I began to use person first
Right.
information
Yeah.
instead of saying the dementia patient, it's the
Right.
patient with dementia. So
Yeah.
they taught me a lot, and they corrected a few things that they thought they had a different memory about, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I changed a few things based on that, and
Yeah.
got their approval for changes. But they're really mostly proud of the book, and
Sure.
proud that I, we're touching lives.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. So this would be a really good place for us to pause a little bit and have you read a passage for us, and then maybe anybody who's here joining us, if you had any immediate questions, we can do some Q&A now, and then I do have some more questions for you, but I would love for you to read a passage for us.
Okay. Well, let me first show you, this is the book, and I guess it's already been shown on the uh, social media. But what I'd like to read is in the chapter, it's okay to accept and ask for help. And you alluded to this particular one, we haven't talked about it yet, the cooking with Harvey, right? So one memorable black beans and rice was very interesting. Yeah, I've always prided myself on my ability to detect flavors in a dish. So I put my skill to the test with this black beans and rice he had prepared. The original recipe called for black beans in a sauce of honey, mustard, olive oil, and cumin. I could detect none of that. And when I asked Harvey what he had used, he could only answer, oh, this and that. I saw tiny bits of tomato or red pepper. Ah, that was salsa. But there was something else. I went to the refrigerator to see if I could get a clue. There it was. Worcestershire sauce, black beans in salsa and Worcestershire sauce. Ugh, not inedible. So I ate it and praised his creativity. Another of his favorite recipes was tomato pesto, a simple dish requiring no heat to prepare except for the pasta, and used tomato paste, basil, olive oil, Parmesan cheese, and garlic. When I suggested this recipe for dinner, he served unseasoned hot tomato paste over spaghetti needles. I decided to take over the cooking after he served shrimp and grits. This was one of our all-time favorite recipes. Shrimp sauteed in canned Italian tomatoes and bacon over grits made yummier with milk, butter, and cream cheese. Well, I asked for shrimp and grits, and that's what I got. Shrimp, still in their shells, stirred into a pot of plain grits. I was simultaneously giggling and cursing as I fished out the shrimp from their grits bath and tried to peel them. What a mess. Once I took over the cooking, I had a variety of options to choose from. If there was a particular dish I wanted and I was longing for some of my favorite dishes that were on my repertoire, I would ask Harvey to help me, giving him tasks like chopping and stirring. I would also pick up dinner from a restaurant on my way home or pick up a prepared dish that only needed to be heated up. Then I had an idea to hire a chef to come to the house and cook with Harvey, providing companionship and giving him a purpose and a way to contribute to our household. It would need to be the right person, though, so preferably someone who knew us and could relate to Harvey. When I told our friend Nancy about this idea to hire a chef, she said that she would do it. Now, Nancy would be the first to tell you that she is no chef. She doesn't really even cook. So I was surprised at her offer and asked her to explain what she envisioned this would look like. She said that I shouldn't worry about it. She would just come and cook with Harvey once a week, and that's all I needed to know. What she did was show up every week with recipes, and she and Harvey would go to the grocery store and shop and then come back and indeed cook with Harvey. She also brought along a blank spiral-bound scrapbook in which she placed copies of the recipes, the menu, and notes about their adventures that day. That scrapbook is one of my treasures. Nancy even recruited another friend, Jill, a renowned cook who once studied in France, to cook with Harvey. And Jill showed up twice a month, also with a bag of groceries and recipes, which she added to the scrapbook. And she and Harvey would create marvelous meals together. His main jobs were to open cans. We have a rather unique can opener that no one but members of our family can open, chop vegetables, and stir. Jill credits Harvey to this day with enhancing her original ice cream dessert recipe by adding copious amounts of chocolate syrup. Both Nancy and Jill continued their cooking sessions for a year and a half, finally stopping when Jill said that Harvey could no longer stir. I didn't know what she meant. How could he not know how to stir? She said that he couldn't incorporate with his stirring and would instead just lightly rotate the spoon on the top of the sauce. When I told other friends about the amazing things that Nancy and Jill were doing, another friend, Hillary, offered to coordinate some meals to be brought to us using an app that allowed people to sign up and sending it to our shared friends' email list. She was able to have at least one other meal per week delivered to us. It was amazing.
Wow, that's so beautiful. What a great community effort. And people want to give. That's the thing. We are always afraid to ask for help, but people love to be able to help and they don't always know how. So giving them something tangible is so wonderful.
Well, in this story, it was just Nancy just saying,
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Right,
Oh my
right,
gosh.
right. Well, and there's so much in that story too. Even the loss of skill
Yeah.
that Harvey went through, the inability to understand the directions or the recipe, to remember how to do something, and then the loss of being able to stir. So this is really sort of what we see, and can be so heartbreaking. So thank you for reading that. I really appreciate it. So since let me ask, are there any questions from some of the folks that are here today? Was there anybody that had an immediate question about what we just heard so far? I want to talk to Renee a little bit about what's happening since then, but if we have any questions, I'd be happy to let you in there. Okay, and if you have any at the end, for sure, we can do that then. So Renee, can you talk to us a little bit about what has opened up for you since publishing the book and retiring? Like, what are you up to now?
Well, I'll first say the first thing I did around Alzheimer's was actually tell our story at a storytelling event. I told the story of Costa Rica when I knew something was going on. And because I really enjoy public speaking, and I felt that maybe the book would be a vehicle for more speaking. And actually, I was asked to speak about Alzheimer's about a year before I wrote the book, and I organized it the way I organized the book, and that was kind of the impetus that, oh, okay, that's how I'm going to put it together.
Yeah.
So then I started blogging a weekly blog about a month before, a year, goodness, a year before the book was published, and I've continued to do that. I continue to blog weekly, and it seems to be pivoting a little bit, not so much specifically about Alzheimer's, although there is always a tie-in. But it looks like I'm writing more about nature and the lessons that different aspects of nature are teaching me about caregiving, about living life. And then I've continued to speak. I am a volunteer community educator for the Alzheimer's Association, and I really enjoy doing that because I
Yeah.
tell our story and then I give the presentation that they have for me to give. And I speak other places too, but my biggest opportunity was earlier in June. I did a 1-day workshop based
Yeah.
on the book, using practices in the book, storytelling. I had 50 participants. It was really well received, and I would love to do more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. That's wonderful. And we do have a question. So, how long did it take you to write the book? And this person, this is Arlen Barnett, and she says, how long did it take you to write the book? And she wrote a book about taking care of her mother with Alzheimer's, and it took her about 5 years. So Renee, how long did it take you?
5 months.
Okay.
Yeah, I think all those journals really
I was
helped.
gonna say,
I'd
you
already
had them.
told the stories, been telling
Yeah.
stories. And the first part of the book, the first, I would say, 6 years of his life were very easy to write because it felt like a love letter to all those people who had helped us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But those last 2 years, that was tough to relive and
Right.
write. I kind of drug my feet on that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would imagine, and you've said this too, just those 6 journals just were so rich with details that could easily have slipped away with just, I mean, my
Yeah.
goodness, you're juggling everything. So yeah, that's a lot.
And
Um,
I took a few writing retreats, just rented a little tiny house Airbnb away on a
yeah,
weekend and just to devote time to write.
that's great. That's a really good strategy too. Um, So I wanted to ask a little bit more about the early onset. About 5 to 6% of people develop symptoms of Alzheimer's before age 65. Harvey was 50 years old, and a very high functioning person in otherwise good health. What advice do you have for people who suspect a younger loved one has dementia? And maybe speak to how they might approach that with the person or family members.
Yeah, that's just so difficult. No one wants to have
Yeah.
that conversation.
Yeah.
No one. Strike while the iron is hot. I had that conversation with Harvey while we were in Costa Rica. I kind of enumerated a few things that I had seen, and he agreed that he had seen the same thing. So it was like right then I was able to say, I'm worried about you. And he was able to say, yeah, I saw it too. What do we need to do? And we
Hmm.
went from there. Um, if if we had not made that trip to Costa Rica, which took him out of his comfort zone, out of his
Right.
routine, and just triggered his inability to keep up, I don't know how long
Right.
it would have taken for me to
Yeah.
see that. Because when you practice medicine together, it's not like we were in the same exam rooms together. I had no idea what was going on in his
Right.
exam.
Right.
But that's just my case. So it might be helpful to kind of keep a list of the things that you've seen, and with love and kindness and every bit of that you can muster, say, hey, I'm worried about you. This is what I've seen.
Right.
Otherwise, they're going to feel ganged up on.
Hmm.
Another
Yeah.
thing you can do is if they've said something about their concerns about their memory or getting lost, you can say, you've been worried about that time where you got lost.
Right.
I'm worried too. Why don't we go to the doctor together? And always offer to go with them. I would not recommend sending someone alone to the doctor. The doctor
Right.
really needs to hear from a close family member or a friend what they've observed. 'Cause they're not the most reliable narrator.
I was going to say they're they're not a reliable narrator, as you put it. Absolutely, and so important to lead with love. That's a
Oh,
great way, rather than a hey, an accusatory kind of thing, or a
right. I'd say
you know,
this, and this.
yeah,
No.
let the record show. There's this. It's more like hey, I'm worried, I'm concerned. How can I help? And that's a great advice.
And I would also say maybe you aren't the right person. So think
Mhm.
about who the best person
Good
to hear
point.
that from would be. Pick the best time of day, best
Yeah,
time of year,
right.
do it at the middle of Christmas
I was
holidays.
just going to say, this is not Thanksgiving dinner
Yeah.
discussion.
Fair.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about it. So that brings up sort of the whole notion of being intentional and what's your intention. And it's not a legal argument you're presenting to somebody. I'm concerned and how you're going to do it. So for sure, how are they going to receive it? So, uh, yeah. Um, and I also spoke to this a little bit earlier too. You're a high performer. You've done so many things and you have so many accomplishments. Um, and I did ask you already, like asking for help in writing the book. Other than your daughters helping you, did you have any outside sources kind of helping you, like putting this together and getting it published and how you did all that,
Specifically with the book, yes,
or
it is.
other things too? But
Yeah,
yeah,
it is self-published, but
uh-huh.
I hired a company to help me because I really wanted it to be a
Sure.
quality product. I wanted it to look like a real book and not a self-published book. Like anyway, so I had an editor,
Yeah,
multiple different editors, and
sure.
a book designer to design the interior and a cover design, and that worked. I worked really closely with this company, Girl Friday Productions. There's a shout out right there.
There you go.
But I was also thinking, help along the way. I cannot speak highly enough about support groups. Oh
Right.
my gosh, no one else understands what you're going through as well as a support group and a counselor. I had a counselor as soon as I knew this is what was going on, and met with him monthly
That's
for the
awesome.
entirety of Harvey's illness. I knew I needed that.
Yeah, yeah. Very important. I forget, did you use hospice services or anything
I
at the
did.
end?
Um, I did, and it's actually something that I'm not proud of. I did not do it very well. So when I felt he qualified for hospice was when he was unable to walk anymore,
Mhm,
and he was transferred to a skilled nursing floor away
mhm.
from memory care. And I asked the nurse there if we could please get hospice, and she said that she didn't think it was appropriate because she thought he would hear that word hospice and give up.
Mhm.
And I was so tired, I did not fight her.
Okay,
And it
okay.
ended up being hospice, what I did not want, just the last 4 days of his life. And
Got
that,
it. Yeah,
my goodness,
yeah.
here's a little aside. I wrote a blog post about that, about hospice, and I did
Yes.
a YouTube video version of it. It has 14,000 views.
Wow. Yeah,
That's how important and how much people want to know about hospice and Alzheimer's
right. Right.
and end of life.
Yes. Yes.
I had no idea.
Yeah. No,
I-
people are hungry.
Mhm.
We don't talk enough about this. We don't talk a lot about end of life. We don't talk about and different people have different experiences with hospice. And you were
Yeah,
getting advice from a nurse who wasn't actually a hospice nurse, correct?
correct, correct.
And so yeah, but you're exhausted at the same time. So knowing how to fight for what you need, and I know at the end of Harvey's life you were just struggling. He was struggling, you were struggling with his struggle, and it was very painful, and I'm sure that it just can feel like so just giving up makes sense to me, like I'm just kind of like you know and that then speaks to being able to advocate with the caregiving organizations, institutions that we need at times, because this became too much for him at home and for you and for your daughters. And so, yeah, it's very challenging. Um, So I did want to talk a little bit about, or have you speak to us a little bit about you talked about the attitudes and therapeutic approaches to dementia and how they've shifted over the years, right? I mean, we're starting to, like you just said, you had what, 14,000 hits on this one thing, and we're
Yeah.
just starting to talk about this more now. Like, I'm in your world. I talk about this stuff all the time. So for me, it's like, this is what I live and swim in, right? And I know we have other people on the call right now who are also in this world and live it and talk about it and swim in it. But not everybody does. And certainly years ago, it was just not spoken about. So we've had some many changes. And the one concept that you talk about is the concept of entering their world, entering the world of the person with dementia. So can you talk to us a little bit about what that is and how that felt for you?
Sure, sure. So in medical school in the 1980s, we were taught to reorient the patient to reality,
Hmm.
to
Yeah,
tell them what day it was, what day of the week it was, and to tell them the truth and to correct them when they were wrong. And that only creates anxiety and frustration on both parts, right?
right,
They
right.
just can't. So the idea of entering into their world is just a process of rewriting the script, again, looking at it from their point of view. Their brains are dying. They
Yeah,
cannot enter our world. They cannot live in the real world because they don't have the resources, the mental resources
right.
that we have. So if we can enter their world and interact with them where they are, that's the best approach. And where I really saw that happening
Yeah,
was at respite care, and then the paid caregivers that I had just seamlessly, it seemed like, could just enter their world. And I realized it's because they didn't know him before. I think it's
yeah,
harder for us
yeah,
who have known our loved ones their whole lives or their adult lives to make that shift.
yeah,
But I learned from them. I learned from those caregivers, oh, that's what you mean.
right.
So I started playing catch with Harvey
Mm.
and building blocks and batting balloons and just playing with him as if he were a 4-year-old without
Yeah,
treating him like a 4-year-old,
right.
entering his world, helping him do tasks around the house and not just taking them on myself, which would be the easier thing to do, but just say, let's do it together and enter the world, his world that way. Enter
Yeah,
the world linguistically too. They couldn't keep up with this conversation. So you
right,
slow it down, use simpler words,
right,
take longer pauses. That's their world, not this world.
right. Yeah, yeah. Um, I was sort of the way I think about that sometimes is the phrase connection before correction, right? Like if we can
Yeah.
connect before we correct, because the correcting, oh no, it's Tuesday, is like that's useless information, right? It's not necessary, it's superfluous. Why is that important? It's
Right.
probably not. So yeah, somebody writes here, Teresa Liberte, other than the professional counseling you mentioned that your daughter sought, were there any support groups or other resources that they found helpful as younger people? Thank you for sharing your story. So yeah, were there any things, I know you've kind of spoken to, they got counseling when they were away at college, but were there other kind of groups that you know of that they connected to or have since?
They really didn't. There really was nothing out
Yeah.
there. And their counselors even were looking for books and groups for them, as I was too. And we really just couldn't find anything.
Yeah.
And they were very reluctant to share with friends. They really did not talk about it with their friends
Hmm.
like I did.
Yeah, yeah,
I could, I did that, and but they couldn't do that. And
right.
I think that might be changing now with virtual support groups. I would
Hmm.
have loved a virtual support group of spouses with younger onset.
Yeah, yes.
Bet there are support groups for children of younger onset. They did actually, now that I'm saying that, they did find a Facebook group of
Okay.
you- of children of younger onset.
Oh,
I'm not
that's
sure how
great.
helpful they found it, but it was there, and I was really
Right.
glad that there is
Yeah.
there.
Um, and I'm just going to put in a shameless plug here. It's not shameless at all, actually. It's a very proud plug for Al's authors because there are a number of books written for children at different ages, younger kids, understanding what might be happening to grandma or grandpa, for teens, for young adults. So there are, if you haven't yet found alsauthors.com, is it .com? .com.
It's
Thank you, Marianne. Alsauthors.com,
yes.
over 300 authors, and Dr. Renee is one of them. And there's just such a rich array of books there that can support. It can support you through understanding some very specific things, but then there are just wonderful stories for kids, and I have loved them and used them with folks as well. But yeah, so Teresa, if you're looking for that, I would encourage you to look at alsauthors.com and find some of those authors. And then another resource might be your school counselors or school psychologists. I'm a retired school psychologist. I would have definitely tried to help people find what they needed for that, or school social workers. There are a lot of people, I think, that are trying to do more of this. And kids need to know because kids are impacted, and you kind of talked about this, Renee, how one time your younger daughter missed a day of school because she was doing something with Harvey. Yeah, and that's something that happens, right? Our kids um, get sidetracked as well. If their parent is busy with this other very, serious situation, they may not finish a homework assignment or they're battling too, trying to stay above the fray. And so for the school system to understand what they're going through is also important, because from the teacher's perspective, they just see, oh, so and so's got her absence rates really gone up. What's going on? That's a conversation to have. So yeah, really important. Um, what else would you like caregivers and family members and those with Alzheimer's to know? Like, what do you think would be important?
Well, I think just tagging in on what we've just been talking about, you're not alone. There are so many resources now. And if you're not in a support group, get in a support group for sure. And with, like I said, with COVID and all these virtual support groups, you can find a support group that's tailored to your specific needs, I suspect.
Yeah.
There is no need for anybody to feel